So good morning, everyone. I'll get us started. I'm Edith Macker. I'm Environment Director for the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, filling in for the first few minutes here for Mayor Kevin Burns, who is coming from another event to join us. Cheryl just highlighted me. So not only is the lighting bad, but I'm at Argonne National Laboratory for a meeting today, and I thought the formulas behind me in the conference room made me look really smart. So I'm going with that, and I'm also on a wireless connection here. But so the topic was in the announcement. We're here to talk about the unbilled electricity or the free electricity. And I'm going to introduce Mark to do most of the talking, but first I want to introduce affectionately who I just coined today, the father of franchise agreements, who is Alexis Kane of US EPA. So Alexis, if you want to, I know we're just putting you on the spot here, he's not prepared, but it was Alexis who got the Mayor's Caucus started on this issue several years ago. So anything you want to say here to Alexis to get us started about?
Yeah, I could just say that more than 10 years ago now, EPA staff in Region 5 were starting to do outreach to municipal government staff to promote energy efficiency and renewable energy. And we would hear sometimes that there was a barrier to doing energy efficiency, or at least a disincentive, not a barrier, a disincentive to doing energy efficiency projects, in that municipal governments were provided unbilled electricity and natural gas. And we didn't really know what that was about or understand that issue. And we decided to look into it, which ultimately resulted in a report that was published January of 2011, which is still available on our website, that found that that this was an issue. It was a significant disincentive, though not a barrier. Certainly, municipal governments that receive unbilled energy were still doing energy efficiency projects and renewable energy projects, but felt that they could do more if the incentives were different. And I'm delighted that the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus is taking up this issue now, and I think it's important, and I'm very interested to see which I will do. And Edith, if you don't have the URL for the report, I'm happy to send it to you.
If you want to put it in the chat, that'd be great.
Okay.
We had it many years ago, and I have to dig for it here, and I can do that while Mark is talking. But just a little bit more context before I turn it over to Mark, and that is that Alexis started us on this issue several years ago. I'm thinking it was something like 2018, Mark, but we can check on that with a published report and an interest in just as it was pre-FEJA, actually, we were starting to look at solar developments for municipalities and found this to be, as Alexis said, a barrier to renewables. So we wanted to look into it with US EPA support. We did a little bit of research on that with Mark's assistance. We had a meeting, Environment Committee meeting about it in Brookfield. And then have not taken coordinated action yet, but this is what this is hopefully going to do. We also had an Energy Academy, a very successful Energy Academy with some 80 municipal representatives registered for an informal course taught by Mark Pruitt. We all had a blast with that, and Mark extended the opportunity to continue to dig in a little bit further and work on a project together using his expertise. And the one that rose to the top was related to this unbilled or free electricity issue. So this really stems, there's a bit of history to it. We do have one other Environment Committee from many years ago topic on it, but it's been a few years since we picked it up, and it's now time. Mark has some interesting learnings in the last few years to share with us about free electricity. So just briefly, Mark Pruitt, he's been our energy advisor at the Mayor's Caucus for a number of years, helping us participate in discussions around FEJA, later than CEJA implementation. He is the brainchild of our Community Solar Clearinghouse Solutions Program, or CS2, He is renowned for his leadership on the Energy Academy. Everybody really enjoyed energy policy, which is crazy, but we all had a really good time with it. And he comes with strong expertise, not only as the former director of the Illinois Power Agency, but also as a professor of energy for both Northwestern University of Illinois, and then has appointments at IIT as well as Argonne National Laboratory, where I am today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mark. And Mark, we do not have a published agenda, just to be clear. Mark will take it from here, and he's got some exercises for us to do for follow-up as well. But please feel free, as with all Zoom meetings, to dialogue in the agenda or in the chat, and we will do our best to address that.
Great.
You,
Thanks, Edith. I appreciate that. And thank you, Alexis. Really appreciate your giving us the boost on this initially. And actually, I have a link at the back of on the last slide of this presentation linking to your study. So just maintaining the thread throughout. If someone can give me a thumbs up and let me know if you've got the full screen view of the slides. Perfect. Thank you. As I think anybody who participated in the Energy Academy, you know that my my tech skills are sometimes very challenged. So I appreciate your accommodation. So let's start with a conversation I've heard maybe a few dozen times, right? And it goes something like this. Someone says, hey, we've got a community sustainability plan. This is great. Let's put solar panels on Village Hall to demonstrate that we're a community that that is walking the walk, right? And you know, the response is, well, that's terrific. How do you want to pay for it, right? Because that's how things work. And the response is, well, the electricity from those solar panels is going to cost 20% less than the regular energy supply. So the project will pay for itself in 5 years, right? So it's that idea that we're gonna have some savings, and the savings will pay for it. And then the response, sometimes from staff, sometimes from staff that's really smart and pushes their consultant in the way as a human shield, says, well, we get free electricity for Village Hall, so there's no savings. And then the response back from the folks who are interested in the solar panels in the first place is, oh, well, okay, free's good. Maybe we should just pay for the solar with regular capital funds. And then now we get into the real nuts and bolts of municipal capital budgeting, which is, okay, what do you not want to do to free up funds to put those solar panels on Village Hall? And usually that's the end of the conversation, until, you know, 1 or 2 years down the road when the same conversation is had all over again. So what we're going to be talking about today is what is this free electricity? Why do we have it? And is there a way of getting out of this cycle, right? Is there a way to gain the benefit that we're getting today, the free, and then be able to find an economic method to support the development of not just solar panels, but energy efficiency or demand response, or even something really simple like community solar subscriptions for municipal facilities. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I think what might make sense is I'll pause at the end of each section to take questions. Instead of holding it to the end, there's 2 or 3 sections. I'll pause at each of those, and we'll just make sure that we ask for questions then. Additionally, if you've got something that you feel you need to say, put it into the chat, and I'll depend on somebody flagging me and letting me know that there's a question, and we can pause and get it asked. The reason I'm saying don't hold it to the end is that there's a few moving parts here, right? And if you're going to understand how the gears fit together, it's best to ask that question about an individual gear before moving on to the next thing. So feel free to ask questions. So here's how we're going to approach this. We're going to talk about franchise agreements, and what they are, how they work, what's covered. Then we're going to talk about that portion of franchise agreements that deals with municipal compensation. The free energy is one of those compensation options. And we're going to speak specifically to Commonwealth Edison and Rider FCA today. But just bear in mind, there's a similar track on the natural gas side with Nicor, Peoples Gas, North Shore Gas. So a lot of this translates. It's not direct, but it's, it doesn't follow, but it rhymes, right? With the natural gas utilities as well. Then we're going to talk about how to optimize that Rider FCA to get the benefit that you're capturing today and still be able to do some of these other sustainable practices. And then, of course, discussion at the end. So before I start on franchise agreements, any questions, concerns? Hearing none, we'll move on. So what is this franchise agreement you speak of? So a franchise agreement is just an agreement. It's a contract between a municipality and a utility. I'm using ComEd as the example here because that's really the primary focus for today's presentation. So who has franchise agreements? Typically, it's cities, towns, and villages, although I understand that there are in some cases, in some parts of the country, maybe townships, maybe counties may have them. But for our purposes, the majority, if not all, of the franchise agreements for electricity in Illinois are between cities, towns, and villages and the incumbent utility. The public utilities here that we're talking about are investor-owned utilities, Commonwealth Edison, Peoples Gas, Light & Co., Nicor Gas. It also extend to cable companies, right? These are all regulated companies. And for that agreement to be in place, there needs to be a benefit and a need on both sides. So the municipality has a need that they want that utility service for their residents within their boundaries, right? And the utility, to be able to provide that service, needs to run wires, conduit, service that equipment, build that equipment, replace that equipment over a term of decades. So they need access to rights of way and easements to be able to deliver energy in this case. So the franchise agreement between the municipality and the utility is a discrete contract agreement. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to talk about contract law, but the whole idea here is that this is something that is done with the mutual agreement of both parties. The municipality cannot impose a franchise agreement upon a utility. Utility cannot impose a franchise agreement on a municipality. It has to be mutually beneficial. We'll touch on some of the complications that brings about on a future slide, but they're separate, right? So that each municipality has one with each utility. They tend to be long-term. 15 to 50 years seems to be the standard, although some are now shorter, 5 years. I think our friends in Evanston have a requirement by ordinance that their franchise agreement be reviewed or up for review every 5 years. The utilities, because there's one of them and hundreds of municipalities, they really prefer to have a standardized form, right? A standard format, so that they're not having to manage each agreement with separate terms and conditions, right? So they really tend to favor uniformity, understandably. And at the end, the utility gets access to the easements to operate its system, and the municipality is compensated for providing that access. And it's that compensation portion of the deal that is the source of this free electricity. But before we get there, let's look a little bit more at these franchise agreements. So this is just an outline of what I see in most franchise agreements in Illinois. So I'm not going to read this to you. This is just to kind of highlight a few items for you. So you see in the underlined sections under rights granted, right? Use of public ways and public property, access to public ways and public property, right? That gets to that, hey, we need to run conduit, we need to run wires, we need to set poles, we need to put a substation in here to serve the residents of your community, municipality A. So the franchise agreement identifies those rights, it then puts the conditions of that franchise agreement onto, these are the obligations that are placed onto the utility. So there's language that says this is how the utility goes about locating utility facilities within our community. This is how the utility restores public ways or public property after servicing or extending their utility system. Tree trimming, right? Big deal. Those requirements are embedded within the franchise agreement. Use of utility facilities, removal of facilities, undergrounding of facilities, right? All the things that are visible from the utility system are typically identified in the franchise agreement. If they are not, maybe they should be, right? Because if it's not a portion of the agreement, it's not explicitly identified, then it's open to interpretation. And that might be where there could be some friction between the utility and the municipality. Services, right? In return for receiving these rights of ways, the utility must provide adequate supply of power, meaning that they can't say, okay, well, we're the utility provider, but we're only going to serve half your residents. No, everybody needs to have universal access to power. It's a duty, actually, to use the contract language there in that second clause. They need to commit to non-discrimination. They need to commit to maintenance of the facility. They need to have a plan that identifies service interruptions. In fact, most municipalities receive an annual or biannual report from Commonwealth Edison identifying the reliability and other performance metrics of their system within each municipality on an annual basis. Makes for some interesting reading. You might not believe it, but it does. It gets down to really the nitty-gritty that says this substation had 5 outages last year. The average outage lasted 2 minutes, and this many consumers were impacted. Right? It's super specific. That is a result of franchise agreements. Then there's other options in there to talk about economic and technology provisions, right? Can there be cogeneration and small power production? Does the utility need to provide extra demand side management services or environmental protection or other elements that get into the economics of and technologies that are provided in addition to the wires, right? Then it gets to administration, talking about who talks to whom, under what conditions, what are the reports, what are the requirements for communicating between the utility and the municipality, because this is not a file and forget, right? The power is flowing all the time. If it's interrupted, your phone rings, their phone rings. You're going to have to know who does what when that happens, not if it happens, but when it happens, right? So a few other things: compensation, which we'll be turning back to, municipal rights, term and termination, and it just kind of, again, it's a contract, right? So it's got all the bells and whistles of a contract, all the obligations, all the performance standards. Everything needs to be spelled out. We're going to talk about this compensation issue, right? What is the municipality going to get? And are any fees or charges waived to the utility? Like, can the utility park their trucks on municipal streets without having to pay for parking? Stuff like that. So that's the historical view of franchise agreements. In recent years, some municipalities have tried to incorporate new elements into municipal franchise agreements. City of Chicago came to the end of its franchise agreement with Commonwealth Edison, and the former Mayor Lightfoot proposed a new franchise agreement that incorporated not just the franchise agreement, all that stuff we just talked about, but also an energy and equity agreement, right? This was a policy statement. You see the lower end of the slide shows these are the policies that were noted in the energy and equity agreement that Mayor Lightfoot negotiated and placed into a proposed but never finalized franchise agreement with Commonwealth Edison. I'm not saying Commonwealth Edison agreed to these, but this is what the mayor's office put out. And you see that it kind of goes beyond that scope of the prior slides And it calls out for a higher level of resiliency, reduction of costs to residents, more benefits from energy efficiency, decarbonization of buildings, and affordable renewable energy and carbon-free transportation. They want to see a reduction in carbon emissions by 2040. So they want this franchise agreement to align with the municipality's climate action plan, and then expand workforce and economic opportunities. So I'm not going to make any value judgments as to whether or not these should or should not be in the franchise agreement. I'm just going to say that this, I believe, is a trend, right? And it's more than just a data point of one. Chicago has looked at this. A number of other large municipalities in other parts of the country have followed a similar path with varying results. I would just note that Commonwealth Edison is responsible for the wires and maintaining reliability for your systems within your communities. They're not responsible for the electricity that travels through those wires. So if you want to meet your sustainability goals, reducing carbon emissions associated with electricity consumption, that really isn't something that the company can do, right? They don't control what electricity flows through those wires. They make sure the wire gets to you, but what flows through those wires is something that's outside of their charter based on our statewide deregulated retail energy structure. So just putting this out there that this is a concept. It's kind of hit or miss in terms of whether or not it's a good fit, but just for those of you who want to dream big, you've got company out there, right? And you can go onto the city's website and pull down the details of the energy and equity agreement to see if that's something that that you'd like to enter. So I'll just pause there and just see if there's any if there are any questions, requests for clarifications, anything like that. Or if I'm chattering too much, just say, Mark, move it along.
We have none in the chat, but if anybody has one, just raise your hand.
I see a hand raised for Laura Dirks.
Hi, Mark. Question. The so-called free electricity for municipalities, has there been any discussion of, I understand the new terms that people have been placing on these agreements, but has there been any talk about fundamentally changing those relationships? This is my first question. And the second question is, since ComEd account holders, residential, commercial, also help pay for that infrastructure, I'm not sure I understand, why is it that it's is it important to have that financial relationship with the municipality, or is just those accounts don't pay enough for that infrastructure?
Okay.
If I'm not sure I'm being clear, but sorry.
Well, let me take a run at it. So the first question was, are any municipalities investigating a fundamental change in the relationship with the local utility? I think probably the clearest example is in again Chicago, where I believe the city undertook an evaluation with an outside consultant to determine what would be the cost and potential benefits and challenges of acquiring the ComEd distribution system within the city boundaries. The term that was used in that discussion was municipalization. It wasn't just Chicago. I believe that one or two cities in Colorado have investigated this, as well as San Diego in California. So municipalization, I would say, would probably be a fundamental change in the relationship with between municipalities and investor-owned utilities. Something short of that might be these kind of additional terms that could go into a franchise agreement. So is that responsive to your first point?
Yes.
Okay. So on to the second point, which is, if I understood correctly, that why is there this financial relationship between the municipality and the why is there compensation flowing from the utility to the municipality?
Yes, yeah, that's what, I guess I don't understand, since I know, like, for example, we have solar on our house, but we still pay ComEd for the infrastructure, the delivery
Mhm.
the mechanisms. And so if they're commercial and residential account holders who pay for this, I was just wondering why there has to be this relationship between the municipality and ComEd as well.
Well, it's to serve to facilitate the expansion and maintenance of the service. That, yes, you're right. The customer always pays, right? That's the first lesson on day one of every course I ever teach. The consumer always pays, right? There is no free anything, as you'll see here in this next section. The need for the franchise agreement is to manage the day-to-day maintenance, servicing, expansion, replacement, refurbishment of the electricity system, right? If there's a new subdivision going in, there needs to be a high level of coordination between the utility and the municipality to ensure that the service that goes to that site can make maximum use of easements to reduce costs and to ensure the highest level of reliability for those residents. So you're right that the cost of the wires is all covered through rates, but the actual planning and deployment of where those wires go, how many there are, how many substations they connect to, and kind of on and down that list of items that are addressed in the franchise agreement, that is what that is what I think speaks to the need for some type of a formal charter or agreement between the municipality and the utility. Because otherwise, then the utility might not have to inform anybody that the power's out in half of Darien, right? That might be a problem. So the franchise agreement helps with that management and serves as the interface between the utility and the municipality.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. Any other questions? If not, I can move on into talking about the money, the fun part.
Mark, there's just a brief clarification. So
Sure.
from Tessa, just wanted to know, so ComEd did not commit to the energy and equity piece of Chicago's franchise agreement. Just to make perfectly clear, that was proposed.
Okay.
No, I'm asking you, that's a question.
Oh, that I don't know.
Okay.
Ultimately, the agreement was, I believe the city council declined to vote on the agreement. So, even the city's legislative process didn't move to approve that concept. So, I wasn't privy to the conversation, so I don't know if ComEd agreed to some or any of it. I just don't know.
Okay, good. And thank you, Kim, put a helpful explanation of the value of franchise agreements with other services in the chat.
Great. Okay, so we've got a franchise agreement, right? So this is where things might get a little confusing, and that's where we're going to focus a little bit on language, right? Because some of these terms sound alike, and we don't want to confuse the issue. So we have a franchise agreement that's between the utility and the municipality. That agreement identifies the parties, the terms, and compensation. The compensation, though, the rules or the options for compensation are not freely open for negotiation. Those are bound by tariff under, in the ComEd situation, Rider FCA or franchise cost additions. And you can see, if you wanted to read Rider FCA, I have a link over on the left, underlined and italicized. It's in the ComEd rate book. That means that it was approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission. And really that sets a boundary for what the municipality can offer the municipality, or I'm sorry, what ComEd can offer the municipality in terms of compensation. So it's not the Wild West. They can't cut checks for $1 million, just because $1 million sounded like a good number. It's bound by tariff via an approved process, and a process and approval by the Illinois Commerce Commission. And you'll see in the tariff the following language, that this tariff, this rider, is for the purpose of compensation for granting the company, compensation of the municipality for granting the company, ComEd, the privilege of using such municipalities' public rights of way for the delivery of electricity. Right? Just what we've been talking about. So when we're talking about this, even though franchise agreement sounds a lot like franchise cost additions, just remember the franchise agreement is a bilateral agreement between the utility and the municipality. It is separate from rider FCA. So the punchline is there are two options for compensation under rider FCA. Municipality can choose whichever one it wants without changing the franchise agreement. Right? So all the kind of downstream conversations we're going to have from here on out, just set aside any concerns that, oh, well, I'm interested in doing that, but I don't want to reopen our franchise agreement. Not to worry. You have two options under rider FCA. They're both allowed. You do not have to reopen your franchise agreement to make a change in compensation under rider FCA. So sorry to belabor the point, but this is just something that I have to do to keep things straight in my mind. So mechanically, how does compensation work? So first, there's an agreement, right, between the municipality and in this case ComEd, where the municipality grants ComEd these rights of way, right? You can lay a conduit under Main Street to connect east and west sides of town, right? So ComEd says, great, we're going to compensate you, the municipality, for allowing us that option. So that compensation can take two forms. We'll discuss those two types in more detail, but just there's an exchange for value. The value is access to the rights of way, and there's compensation that flows from ComEd to the municipality. But is that ComEd's money? The answer is no, absolutely not. Every consumer in this municipality gets a monthly ComEd bill. On that ComEd bill are rider FCA charges, right? It's a line item in the bill. And whatever the cost is of that compensation provided by ComEd to the municipality is paid by ComEd, but ComEd receives, has the right within the tariff to charge the residents and businesses within that municipal boundary charges to recover that cost of that compensation. So don't think that this is out of the generosity of ComEd's heart. This is a reimbursement cycle, and ultimately any revenues that are paid to the municipality are collected from the residents of that municipality. Now, some of you are going to be like, well, why are we doing this, right? I don't know the legislative history. I don't know why it was set up this way. My guess is that there was a sense that if there was going to be a franchise agreement, that there needed to be some type of compensation going to the municipality so that there was something to negotiate around. And this cost recovery mechanism became part of the landscape, and it's been there for a very, very long time, decades and decades. So I can't tell you why, I can just tell you what. So when you're thinking about, oh, well, this is free money, it's not free money. It's coming from your residents. If you have less compensation to the municipality, there will be less funding collected from your residents. Now, it's going to be a tiny little bit of funding because the charges that we're talking about here are pretty modest in most cases. We'll get into some details, but they're different for each of your options. So what are the types of compensation? Well, there's ordinance consideration, which is the free electricity. And this is probably 99% of municipalities in Northern Illinois operate under this type of a structure with ComEd. And then there's direct payment, and that's where you get a monthly check from ComEd, right? So in kind, right, ordinance consideration, I get a credit on my bill, or direct payment, cash, right? Those are the two options. These are included in rider FCA, and the municipality can choose which option it wants, subject to observing the rules that have been approved within rider FCA, without, again, having to change the terms of the franchise agreement. So what's going on here with these two options? Well, again, that ordinance consideration is the free electricity for qualified municipal accounts. Every account receives a ComEd bill. At the bottom of that bill is a credit that zeroes out the charges on that bill. So if there were $100 of supply charges and delivery charges in that month, ordinance consideration will be listed on that bill with a credit of $100, yielding a net balance of 0. So what's a qualified account? Well, a qualified account is any account that is a non-revenue generating account. So city, village, town hall, an example of that. Public works, an example of that. Public safety, fire, police, those. Revenue generating facilities that would not be qualified for this free service would be like water pumping stations, because there's a bill that is collected from residents related to the water pumping function. Streetlights are not included here either. Rec facilities, those are considered to be revenue generating. So it's not every account that can qualify for this. It has to be non-revenue generating. The other option is this direct payment. And the direct payment is what it sounds like. It's a check and it gets paid every month. And it has a targeted annual value that is roughly approximate to what would be granted under ordinance consideration. Ordinance consideration is defined by value. The value of the ordinance consideration is set annually by an equation. Again, you can find that in the rider, in the tariff. The direct payment is pretty closely associated with where that ordinance consideration value is. And it comes monthly. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right? It's designed to be revenue neutral for the municipalities. And again, you can choose, you as a municipality can choose which one is best suited for you. So just some ComEd bill images. You see, this is an ordinance consideration bill. Take a look at this. You see the electricity services, right? Highlighted in the blue boxes over on the right. So they've got electricity supply services, they've got delivery services, and then taxes and other. They've got environmental cost recovery, down here, renewable portfolio standard, zero emission standard, energy efficiency programs, right? So it's just like a regular bill. It's just at the bottom, you see in the red box, ordinance consideration. That's a credit for $82.76. Well, that just happens to be the amount to get you a 0 bill. So voila, free electricity, right? It's not that the electricity is free, it's that you got a credit to offset the cost of that electricity supply and delivery, as well as the taxes. So that's all the magic that's there, right? It all comes down to arithmetic. So when you're saying, okay, Mark, ordinance consideration, I get it. I get a credit on my bills for non-revenue generating facilities. That means that I use electricity, but I don't pay for it. So that's a value. ComEd is entitled to recover that cost from residents. So how does that work? Well, under ordinance recovery, ordinance consideration, every year ComEd calculates a percentage charge that is included as a line item on every ratepayer's bill in your municipality. And that percentage, and I just pulled this from the ComEd rate book. You see Addison had a rate of 3.02% running through May of 23, and then it dropped to 2.926% going into May of 2024. So that percentage is applied to the sum of costs on each monthly consumer bill of the individual charges for the standard metering charge, the distribution facilities charge, and the Illinois electricity distribution charge. So it's not the whole bill, it's just a couple of elements of the bill. But this is reset every year because those charges change every year. So ComEd adjusts these rates to keep the value of the ordinance consideration relatively flat and consistent with the value of the electricity that's being delivered to those municipal facilities. And here you have a copy of a bill showing, again, electricity supply services up here at the top, it's $69. Then delivery services at $76. And then down here in taxes and others, you see franchise cost, $4.85. So that $4.85 is multiplied by against the $8.12 for the standard metering charge, the $50.65 for the distribution facilities charge, and the $1.09 for the Illinois electricity distribution charge. As you can see, it's not that much of a charge, but it shows up, and it shows up every month, right? So nobody gets excluded from this, and that's the system, right? So that's ordinance consideration. That's the free electricity. What if you wanted to get a check, right? Is it the same thing? Close, right? So getting a check, I think people understand that, but how are customers charged? Well, it's a little bit different. It's not a percentage on a few of the fees. It's a rate based on consumption during every month of the year for each consumer. So here's the current rate book for infrastructure maintenance fee table. And you see that they've got it blocked out. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Those are blocks. You see Chicago and Evanston listed here. And you see the rate. That's the cents per kilowatt hour in each of those blocks. So the way you read this is in Chicago, for the first 2,000 kilowatt hours delivered in a monthly billing period, that amount of electricity will be multiplied by 0.53 cents a kilowatt hour to establish that the revenue that's going to be collected from that consumer in that first block. So if you have a consumer that consumed 3,000 kilowatt hours in a month, they would be charged 0.53 cents per kilowatt hour for the first 2,000 kilowatt hours. That remaining 1,000 kilowatt hours, to go from 2,000 to 3,000 kilowatt hours, that last 1,000 kilowatt hours would be charged in block B, which is 0.35 cents kilowatt hour, right? And you see that for these municipalities, they've selected and opted to have higher charges at the lower end of the spectrum. That means that proportionately, residential and small commercial customers pay more, right? More is an arguable term, but they're paying a higher rate because they typically don't use more than 2,000 kilowatt hours in a year, whereas industry uses a lot of electricity, and the more they use, the lower their marginal rate goes, right? So this is how block charges are determined. But Chicago and Evanston do this, and this is what needs to be established to collect the right amount of money to compensate the municipality. This is subject to state law, right? So there's maximums that can be collected, but there's a fair amount of analysis that goes into finding the right number. And these numbers are set by ordinance. So the municipality determines this subject to state law, right? As opposed to the franchise consideration, which is set by the utility every month based on formula. So it's an important difference.
Mark, before you go on, can I ask you two questions? Is there a way for the municipality to see the total amount that their residents are paying if you're getting the free energy?
Yes, you need to put in a request to ComEd through your local representative, and they ought to be able to get you that fairly quickly. When we worked with Evanston, when they made the conversion, ComEd rep was very helpful and provided that information very quickly. And I have an example of the type of data that they provide on a future slide. But yeah.
And just on this slide that you're on, it seems like Evanston residents got a much better deal than Chicago residents. Am I misreading?
No, this is just based on the number of customers, how they use electricity, the volume of their average monthly usage, and the cap of the allowable amount of collections. This is what Evanston decided to do. I don't know that one's better; they're just different. So I wouldn't encourage you to say, oh well, should Evanston have collected as much as Chicago? The answer is no. They shouldn't. They collected as much under this infrastructure maintenance fee to equal the value of what they were receiving under the franchise cost addition. So that's why the numbers are different, but the basis is different.
Thanks.
Good questions. Any
Mark,
other
do you-
questions?
Yeah, Mark, we've got one from Nick Greifer. Nick,
Yeah.
do you want to unmute and ask?
Well, yeah, thanks. I don't know, either now or a little bit later, just wondering, let's suppose you're kind of cost neutral in year one, that you switch over to the actual payment methodology where you get the actual check cut each year. But what about, 5 or 10 years down the road, will it still be equivalent? In other words, I know the free electricity naturally keeps up with inflation, right? But does the other methodology keep up with inflation?
So are you asking, does that cash payment adjust on an annual basis? The
Yeah.
answer is no. No. And that's one of the challenges here. That's something that bears some analysis. But it also provides the opportunity, we're coming off 12 months of the highest rates ever paid in Northern Illinois. That's going to be your high watermark for making your conversion for cash payment, right? So, our prices in the future are we going to be as high as they were a year ago? Probably not. But, that's something that only some analysis can lay out for you and help make an informed decision as to whether or not this is worth pursuing.
Yeah, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of a finance director. I'd want to, in year one, keep it cost neutral or, revenue neutral, I should say. But then going forward, try to keep it revenue neutral is going to be somewhat tricky and probably constant analysis, I would think.
Right. Yeah, this is not a set and forget type of activity. It's going to bear active management. Now, there is a strategy that I believe could be employed and allowed by the tariff that would allow for periodic movement back to the franchise cost addition to kind of recalibrate and reset at those prior rates, but you can't do that annually or monthly. It has to be over a prolonged period of time. So I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that that looks to be allowable, and maybe it bears more evaluation and engagement with ComEd on that issue. Great. Really good questions.
Yeah, there are 2 more questions. I don't think they're urgent. Do you want to take them?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Marcella, you've got a question. Marcella does. So Marcella's question was, there seems to be a lot happening with ComEd and NICO rate change requests. Does this have any bearing on today's topic?
Well, yes, ComEd has proposed rate increases for the delivery charges, which is about 10 to 30% of your total bill. They're proposed increases in those charges of about 50% over the next 5 years. So that's material, right? That should go into your equation. I'm not as familiar with the NICOR charges, but they too have rate increases proposed. I don't think they're quite to the level of what ComEd has proposed, but they are significant. So that should be part of your analysis.
Laura, you have a question? Laura Dirks has another one. And if not, Laura, if you're
Sorry,
on-
no.
Oh, okay, go ahead. No, you don't have it. Okay. And Tim Milburn wants to know how EV charging at non-revenue generating facilities will work in the FCA. Does this mean that the facility can only provide free electricity? Can the facility cover its costs only if it doesn't generate revenue?
I think I understand the question. If I miss it, please, redirect me. If a charging station was placed connected to an account that is free as long as that charging is provided with no cost to the user, say it's for your municipal fleet, it could continue to connect and receive free service under Rider FCA. I believe that the challenge would occur, and perhaps you'd need to have a new account if it were to be a paid charging station, because that would violate the revenue limitation on ordinance consideration credits for that account.
Mark, how you doing? It's Tim. Just
Tim.
the question is, if you put the charger at City Hall and it's publicly available,
Mhm.
what happens? Would you have to set up a metered account?
No, not under the
But it's
tariff.
free
I understand.
electricity that's not being used by the municipality, but rather the public. Does that change anything?
ComEd may have a different opinion, but there's nothing in the tariff that identifies any distinction between the user. So as long as it's not revenue generating, it should qualify as an eligible account. Now, there's a limit to the amount of credit, monetary credit that the municipality can use. So if you were to put 3 dozen charging stations there that massively increase the consumption, that increase in consumption might exceed the amount of credit that the municipality is due, in which case that would trigger ComEd, I would imagine, to drop that account from franchise consideration or limit the amount of credit it would allow for that account.
Thanks.
Mhm.
I think we're caught up.
Great.
If you want to go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. So what are the implications? Under ordinance consideration, it always settles at 0 for the account, right? If you have lower charges, you get lower credits. If you use less electricity, or you subscribe to community solar, or you put in battery storage, or you put solar on the roof, and you reduce the amount of electricity that you're actually consuming, that's great. You can do it, but there's not going to be any reflection, any monetary gain in that, because if you go from $200 down to $100 in charges, so does your credit. It would go from $200 down to $100, so you're always at 0, right? So that's a zero-sum game. There is this, so there's no direct incentive to take action, and we see this at a lot of village facilities, right? Why, I've been in a lot of village halls, and I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just observing that if you want to see some old school 1960s, 70s vintage lighting, go to your local village hall. You're probably got a good chance of seeing it, especially if it's an older village hall, because there's no money, there's no monetary value in upgrading that lighting. So that's where you still see incandescent light bulbs, HIDs, all that stuff. There is a direct, indirect incentive to reduce costs. If the municipality is being altruistic, they might want to go ahead and make efficiency upgrades, or do community solar, or do some of these other things, because in reducing the cost, yes, they reduce the credit, but if they reduce the credits, then ComEd will collect less from the residents. So technically, if the municipality wants to reduce costs to its residents, they will follow through. But in my experience, unless there's a financial benefit to the municipality directly, that becomes a difficult proposition, right? Because then the municipality is just kind of passing through, taking on capital cost without a directed cost avoidance stream. Just how things seem to work out. Under direct payment, if you are able to achieve lower charges, you keep the same revenue. So if you were going to get $100,000, you keep getting $100,000, right? So this gives you a lot of incentive to do everything, right? Community solar, rooftop solar, battery storage, all that stuff. There is also, so that benefits the municipality. There's also the indirect benefit to the residents. It's not in the form of lower Rider FCA charges, because that's going to stay constant. The advantage is that the overall cost of the municipality will be lower, and technically there'll be less operational cost to support the energy expenditures for municipal facilities, that then is paid for by municipal residents through taxes and fees. So similarities, but different emphasis, different drivers. And this is really, I think, where Alexis and their original study was going, which is one of these is a barrier to financing projects, and the other is not. But even the direct payment has its challenges. So I'll just pause there before we talk about how to optimize the FCA. Any
One
questions?
question from Sandra. Sandra, if you want to unmute and ask, I'll give you a second.
So I'm not understanding whether the FCA is based on use or on delivery. Because when we were going through the rate sheet, the invoice from ComEd, it looked like the franchise fee was based on the delivery expense, not the consumption expense.
So the franchise fee is a percentage that is applied against three discrete costs. Let's go back here. Is this the item that you're speaking to?
Yes.
Okay, so this franchise cost is calculated. We would have to see the municipality in which this account is located, right? In the rate book, we'd have to find out what is their percentage.
Mhm.
And we would multiply that percentage against these three costs here. I'm sorry. The three costs under delivery services labeled standard metering charge, distribution facilities charge, and Illinois electricity distribution charge. These three charges sum up to about $60 in this month. And the franchise cost, the $4.85, is probably what, 3%, 4% of that $60 charge for this customer. Is that responsive to your question?
So the delivery service fee, the charges fluctuate with supply.
Correct. The standard metering charge is fixed. It changes occasionally based on new tariff. Distribution facilities charge, yes, if you have more of the billing determinant, in this case KW, if that goes up, the rate remains the same, but the volume goes up and you have a higher charge. That would therefore increase the amount of franchise cost that is collected from this account.
Thanks.
Yep. And this is why we're doing this as a separate course, because it is a deep dive. So I appreciate your patience. Okay, well, we can get onto the guts of how you optimize this rascal, if unless there's other questions.
There's some questions about eligibility, which units of government are benefit from the franchise agreement, franchise cost addition. You want to take those now or at the end? Your call.
Let's go ahead and take them now. I think we're doing okay on time. Is that all right, or?
Sure. So there were a couple of questions generally about whether the library is eligible and who benefits. So particularly in Villa Park, I think Robert had said that the library benefits from the franchise agreement, even though they're a separate taxing body. So I imagine that's different for each municipality, but if you have any insight into that.
I haven't seen that. I've only seen it with entities that can provide an easement. And typically that responsibility, that control of the land and easements usually resides with villages, towns, and cities. But I have heard about some other units of government having franchise agreements. I haven't seen one, so I'm not doubting what you're saying. It's just I haven't seen one up close in person. But it's school districts tend not to have this. Counties tend not to have it. Mosquito abatement districts, I haven't seen it. Rural fire districts, haven't seen it. Community colleges, those are another unit of local government, haven't seen it there either.
Thank you.
Any others? Well, cool, good question. So hopefully decent responses. So this is how I would go about analyzing, should I make a change, right? Is the juice worth the squeeze, as some of my contracting friends have said. So what I recommend you do is, of course, you can contact ComEd and get their numbers, right? I also suggest that you check your own billing statements. As indicated, even though you're getting the quote unquote free service, you're still getting a bill every month. I suggest that you go through the past 12 months for each of your municipal facilities, just using these as examples, of and get their 12 months and break those costs down into whether it's in the supply charges, the delivery charges, or the taxes and fees portions of the bill, and then add them up, right, to your annual charges, and then record what was the actual ordinance consideration in every month, and then tally those up for a year. And then when you add your annual charges against your utility compensation, you probably should come out at 0 in terms of utility account balance. That means that your credits under ordinance consideration are equal to your annual charges. Do that for all of your facilities for the past 12 months, or have somebody do it for you. Then you're going to have you're going to extend, once you've recorded everything, now you're going to move into analysis. So you have a similar spreadsheet and you carry over your utility compensation, and you're just going to assume that moving forward, that your direct payment value will be approximately what your ordinance consideration value is. Could be a little bit different, but it's going to largely be the same, right? So just use that as your benchmark. Carry that utility compensation from ordinance consideration down to your direct payments. Then run a series of scenarios. And in this scenario, I have said, okay, what happens if I get this direct payment, but for my retail supply, I highlight that in red to correspond to the red dashed box over here on the left. I'm going to estimate my new supply costs with community solar subscriptions, right? So if I have to pay that bill, fine, I get it. But I'm going to have a community solar subscription that gets me a 10% rough reduction there. Okay, great. I'm going to recalculate my costs reflecting that lower supply charge resulting from the community solar subscription. My delivery charges and taxes and fees for community solar are going to be the same, right? So they're highlighted here in purple. But now that I know I'm getting my utility compensation, let's just say for Village Hall, about $15,000. I know that with my community solar subscription, I have a lower supply charge than I had before. So my annual charges under the new compensation, the direct payment compensation, is only going to be $14,500. So I'm getting $15,000, I'm paying $14,000. That means that I, as the municipality, have now got $1,000, almost $1,100 that wasn't there before, right? In the past, if I'd done community solar, I simply would have gotten less credit. Now, when I do community solar, I get to keep that cash because I'm not spending it. Getting $15,689. I'm going to pay only $14,591. That means that of that $15,689 of cash that I received from ComEd, I've got about $1,100 of it that wasn't spent. So it's not even savings, it's new cash. And I do that for every account. And I do that for community solar subscriptions. I do that for rooftop solar. I do that for energy efficiency. I do that for battery technology. I do that for new controls, right? If I really want to get fancy, I'll convert these dollars over into these efficiency and solar array activity, and I'll calculate that into my CO2 benchmark, right? There's a lot of things that change when you change the payment structure. Now you have incentives to reduce costs, reduce consumption, and at the same time, you're likely going to be reducing emissions as well. So this can be a rather involved exercise. It just depends on what you think you can do, how much money is on the table, literally. in this set of examples, just by going to community solar. This fictional community was going to say it was going to find about $21,000 in the span of a year. So not too bad for signing a community solar subscription. So once you've done that analysis, you plan out your transition, right? Because you're going to have to pass an ordinance. And if you're going to pass an ordinance, you're going to have to work with your elected officials. So this is a process that we used with the city of Evanston when they decided that they were going to change. Their primary drivers were that they wanted to get those accounts that were under ordinance consideration onto direct payment so that the municipality could extend their retail energy supply contract, which included the purchase of RECs, to include the volumes for those ordinance consideration accounts to better benchmark and meet their environmental and sustainability goals. So we did the analysis. We requested the data from ComEd, got some good input from them. We analyzed the costs, and just very similar to what I laid out before. And then we ran some calculations to find out what the new rate would be, that block structure, based on the prior 12 months ordinance consideration value. Once we had all that, we socialized the findings to the board. I believe used memo and a little bit of a lunch and learn. Also, they identified how the new funds were going to be used, if there were excess funds after receipt of funding from ComEd, and then payment for the new utility accounts. Any excess, where was that going to go? And then we also drafted, and the city passed an ordinance to formalize the transition. That ordinance needed to have the schedule of rates, right? So all that homework wasn't just for academic purposes, it fed directly into the ordinance as required by statute. Once the ordinance was passed, the municipality needs to issue a formal notice to ComEd, just a communication, at least 60 days prior to the transition. You can't just expect them to flip the switch and get it done next week. There's a process, and they need time to get that done. 60 days is not unreasonable. During that time, during the transition, we undertook public education and put some information on the municipal website, and again went back to village staff, especially those in the municipality that deal with accounts payable, accounts receivable, and just let them know that, yeah, you have been receiving these bills and they've been zero. Now there's a cost, but we're also receiving payments. So things changed, and we had to set that up with all the internal systems there. And then on into management, right? We went out to identify and pursue lower cost supply options, retail, community solar. And then I know that the city is now pursuing renewables and energy efficiency projects for those facilities that are now direct pay accounts. So, you know, there are several steps, I acknowledge that, but there's no set time frame. You don't have to get this done by any particular time unless you want to. And remember, you're just, even though there's all these steps and there is analysis and you want to make the right decision, in the end, you're just choosing one of two options within the tariff. You are not reopening that franchise agreement, right? So this is, and should be, an economic and energy policy discussion. You're not taking on ComEd, you're not municipalizing, you're not doing any of that stuff. That's all separate. This is just compensation that you're due under your existing franchise agreement. So it's you know, it can be a fair amount of work, but it is not rising to the level of renegotiating your relationship with ComEd. Still the same relationship, they're just compensating you in a different manner. So here's another consideration. This isn't going to take care of itself. There will be math, right? Or more accurately, arithmetic. This is to the question from earlier about, can you request the data from ComEd? Yes, here's the data from ComEd, right? And of course, it comes in a spreadsheet. And somebody has to comb through all this and convert at the top here. ComEd will break out, you know, those blocks, right? Those step charges and the KW limits. And then it's going to break out for every month what was the consumption for each month. And from there, you know, now you've got your basis. You know how many, you know, what was the consumption of all accounts that had at least 2,000 kilowatt hours? Well, it was 15 million kilowatt hours in May of 2019, right? So you have to convert all of this into these estimated rates down here, right? You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You see the rates that came up here, and you see the dollar recovery that's coming up. And then you want to find out what does that mean for single family or small commercial rate class, as well as all the other rate classes. And you just want to do your due diligence. And you know, you always have to reference back, if you're a municipality of less than 500,000 residents, what you collect under the infrastructure maintenance fee cannot exceed what you were collecting under Rider FCA, this 2.237% number. So you're balancing, right? You're always going to be balancing. But this is just what you're going to have to do or have someone do for you if you want to determine, is this worth doing? You can't simply say, oh, I don't want the free stuff because it doesn't allow me to do rooftop solar. You want to go into this knowing how much am I collecting, what is the implication of making the change from a rates perspective, and how are we going to structure this collection? Because we're going from this flat percentage to step charge, right? Is there a policy consideration? So there's going to be math. There's also going to be a little bit of a lag. So this is a little bit difficult to track, but just bear with me. So in the orange column, you've got the customer billing month. So let's just pick February of 2023. Well, when a customer pays their bill in February of 2023, what are they going to be paying for? Well, they're actually going to be paying for the ordinance consideration costs that ComEd paid to the municipality back in August 2021. That's because there's about a 16 to 18 month lag between when ComEd issues the credit to the municipality versus when they collect it from the residents, right? So that lag period means that if you were to make the change, right? If you were to move from franchise consideration to direct payment, or ordinance consideration to direct payment, and you started that in January of 2023, well, guess what? ComEd is going to say, that's fine, but we're going to need to continue to collect those fees all the way until they're paid down in, July of 2024. So you make the switch in 23, but those obligations in January 2023 don't get paid until July of 24. Additionally, when you make that change in January, what was credited in January gets paid by consumers. What direct payments were paid in January of 2023 get collected from residents in February of 2023. Only a 1 month lag on the direct payments. So ordinance consideration is 18 months, direct payment 1 month. So that means that for about a period of 17 to 18 months, your residents are going to be paying both the ordinance consideration, or I'm sorry, the franchise cost adjustment, in addition to the infrastructure maintenance fee. And that looks like two charges because it is two charges. What we calculated for Evanston was that for a single family residential account, that amounted to about 92 cents a month added cost or duplicative cost. So over the term of this transition, about $17, $17.50 for each single family account was going to see that amount of premium for having those two charges in place at the same time for 18 months. And then a multifamily residential account came out to about 63 cents a month, or right at about $12. So this is something else that people might say, well, wait a minute. you made this change. Now I've got 2 charges on my bill. What's the story? Well, the story is that the ordinance consideration collections are 18 months in arrears. So that all has to be paid. It all has to be cleared out. And so for a period of time, both charges will appear on the bill. There are some other constraints. So there's a uniformity constraint that says the municipality must be entirely on ordinance consideration or direct payment. You can't pick and choose. We say, well, we want direct payment for City Hall, but ordinance consideration for Public Works. Nope, one or the other, binary. There's also caps. If your population in your municipality is less than 500,000, your direct payment value can't exceed the value of the ordinance consideration in the prior 12 months, right? So that's your cap. If you're a municipality greater than 500,000 population, then your cap is set by statute. I believe that applies in the case of Chicago. So this is not unlimited funds, right? There are constraints in terms of the amount that can be collected. And then they're fixed. And this was something that was raised in a question earlier. The direct payment compensation is not going to change in response to underlying energy, delivery, or taxes and fees. Any of those change, you're not getting any more or any less of those direct payments. So you're going to have to manage this going forward if this is the direction you want, right? What I would suggest is you need to take a look at your budget, what would come in under direct payment, and try to find a pathway that says, okay, we can make all this work at 60% of the budget or 70% or 80%. Figure out what is the cushion that you feel is necessary to keep your cost net or level or better over, say, a 5-year period, right? Because that's going to be what people are going to say is, well, are we better off today than yesterday by making this change? And by running your numbers, you'll be able to answer that question. So the benefits here is that this conversion, if you undertake it, is new money. It's not savings, right? You have savings now because you're getting a credit. If you convert to direct payment, that's new money, right? You get to decide what to do with it. You get to retain what you don't use. So that's an advantage. Maybe that goes to sustainability program fund. Maybe it goes to general fund. I don't know. That's up to you. That's not dictated by the tariff. So if you reduce the costs, right? If you find a way to do this, you now have an alignment of your financing as well as your policy positions for reducing costs, along with reducing consumption, reducing reliance on the grid, and all those other things that a lot of folks in the communities are asking about, right? We have this policy. What are we doing in our own municipal facilities? Well, if you get financial alignment, you can start to speak to that with greater clarity. Again, this doesn't require you to reopen the franchise agreement. And lastly, you might want to take a look at your natural gas franchise agreement as well. That might provide you some pathways of unifying how you approach franchise agreements for your electricity as well as for natural gas. So I have here some links. One is to the EPA report on franchise agreements, and the other is to the current writer FCA. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention. And again, always appreciate the time you all dedicate to learning this rather archaic information, and hopefully there's a nugget of value in there for you. So I'm just going to take down the presentation, and we can open it up for general conversation. If people want to unveil themselves so we can see each other, that's great, or stay hidden if you're still working on your sandwich.
So I'm going to just address the questions that I think are covered, that you had covered, and that was Frank Heitzman and Carrie had questions about sort of the burden of still the infrastructure maintenance fee or the continued fee. So it sounds like that's going to continue. And there you talked about the transition time. Marcella, you asked, and there's been a couple of questions about how to find out if a particular public agency is benefiting from the free electricity. And Mark, you can take this one, but I think it's just, you can look at the utility bill for that particular agency, or you can talk to your external affairs person to get clarity on that.
That's correct. And any account that receives ordinance consideration, you would see that credit on their bill, their monthly bill. So that's the giveaway there. There's not a way, if they're getting direct payment. We just saw the two municipalities that are receiving direct payment from the tariff book. So if they're not on that list, I don't think they're receiving direct payment.
So with that, I'm just gonna invite people to raise their hand and just talk to Mark directly. If you have a question that was not answered yet.
Oh, I should mention, Edith and Cheryl, I'll send these over to you. I was gonna just make this presentation generally available, so however you like to distribute. Additionally, I have some model spreadsheets that I've used to kind of take down the information and run some analysis in the past. So I'll send those over, clean versions, right? So it's pretty simple. And then a draft ordinance that we put together for Evanston when they made their conversion. And you can use that or not use it, but it kind of gives this sets a channel, right, for how can this work and what do the words look like. And so those will be made available. And I'm happy to help out if anyone has a franchise agreement they want me to look at. I've read a number of them. By no means an expert, but it's familiar territory, and maybe we can figure things out.
Go ahead, Kim.
I take issue with your statement that you're not an expert.
Oh,
This is
you're very kind.
This is great. I remember we were at a meeting, I don't even know when, Edith, where we talked about the franchise agreements in person years ago.
Many times, but there was one in Brookfield. I think it was 20.
That's where it was. It was in Brookfield, yes. So I'm glad we've moved forward a little bit from that to find a way to actually benefit from energy efficiency and renewable energy. But I cannot imagine our staff ever having time to do this sort of analysis. Mark, is this something that we can hire you to do, or are there other municipalities interested in, doing some sort of a share of like an intern who has good math skills?
Yeah, I can help. I can guide an intern if you want to share the resource. Whatever you guys want is fine with me. I think there's value in knowing how it works. Might not be the right thing for every municipality. So I don't want anyone to think, oh, Pruitt's pitching this because he wants to do some contract work. I just think that there's a value in understanding how the numbers work. So however I can help, please let me know, but it doesn't have to be me.
Tim, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So we were at this interesting meeting last week with ComEd regarding the new beneficial electrification plan, which is to roll out next year. And much like, solar or community solar, there's going to be some features that might tie into municipalities, such as, they may have a fleet that they want to do mobile energy storage overnight. They may be able to benefit from reducing demand charges. There's a new new electric vehicle charging rate. Can that stuff be rolled into the same logic under the FCA in some fashion? In other words, the distributed energy and the beneficial electrification plans, can a municipality benefit from these other aspects?
Well, I think to the extent that they impact on the FCA, I think what you're looking at is, the financial aspect of if there's electricity that's going to be covered at no charge, or it's going to be compensated some other way, then we have the rule book for FCA. If you want to change rider FCA, that has to go through the Illinois Commerce Commission. If you're talking about including the obligations for beneficial electrification, EVs, those types of things within the franchise agreement, well, that's going to be opening up that franchise agreement and renegotiating. And maybe that is the right thing to do. I don't know. I would imagine though that the utility would be a little concerned because they like that consistency. So it might be that they would say, well, we can operate under beneficial electrification without touching either of those. And maybe it's a side agreement or something in writing. I don't know if I'm responding to what you need, Tim, but maybe one thing, just kind of riffing off of what Kim Stone mentioned, is that if there is interest in the group of examining this at the individual municipal level, maybe once we have an idea of scale of interest, maybe a secondary analysis could layer on top of that to say, okay, well, what's the headroom that's available for EV charging at municipal facilities that receive Rider FCA credits? You know, we don't have to stop at the edge of, okay, well, what payment structure am I going to use? There can be this additional option of saying, okay, well, how do I leverage this up and gain more value?
Okay, so a little bit of to be determined. I'd be interested in continuing that conversation. So, thanks.
For sure. And Tim's the expert on EVs, so, you know.
No,
Yeah.
Tim is the expert on EVs, but taking what Tim said and what you've said, Mark, I think I just put this in the chat, we could use EVs if you make the energy efficiency improvements to your buildings, but then you add EV charging, you get more out of your franchise agreement for the same cost, potentially.
I see the logic in that. Yeah. Yeah. The numbers will bear out. It'll be different for every municipality, but absolutely. And, you know, Village Hall might be an appropriate place for charging. I don't know, but might bear well under analysis.
Let's get to the rest of the questions, and then I want to hear what Alexis has to say or thinks about all this too. So Carrie, probably the last of the questions.
So thanks for the presentation, Mark. Just to confirm, there's no way to reduce rates for residents other than possibly not renewing your franchise agreement at some point, because both options with the rate pay or the second offering, it would just, with energy efficiency, you just free up that money for other things, but it's still keeping the same cost for residents, right?
Largely, and I may have oversimplified. So you can get lower costs for your residents if you make those efficiency upgrades under the ordinance consideration. If you make those upgrades, the credits coming to you will be less because your costs will be less. And that means that ComEd will collect less from your residents.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So
Okay.
that'll happen that way.
Right.
If you are under direct pay, you're going to continue to get paid by ComEd at a certain rate. If you then do efficiency, it is at your option as a municipality to then say, okay, we want to adjust our rates downward, right? Those block charges
Mhm.
to reflect our need for less compensation, right?
Okay.
And if that number goes down, then again, ComEd is just passing this through, then they would reduce those charges that are collected from residents. Is that responsive to your question?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
So Alexis, I'll let you offer some closing comments, then I do want Kevin to have a chance to greet the group who's arrived at the meeting. But Alexis, what
Sure.
did you think? Yeah.
I think it's a great presentation. I hope municipalities will consider their options. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the natural gas side. I think it's quite a bit less complicated on the natural gas side, or at least a dozen years ago when I was looking at this, Nicor and North Shore were both offering cash out options where you would establish a baseline, I think based on the past 3 years of your gas usage. And then you would get a credit every year that was whatever the current price of natural gas was times that baseline gas usage. So that would sort of help address concerns about the potential for inflation in natural gas prices, because your payment would go up as prices go up. Mark, I'm not sure if the same deal is on offer now or as then, or if I'm quite remembering that correctly, but if you have anything to add about that or to correct, please do.
That's my understanding. And I know that a number of years ago, I worked on this a little bit. A number of municipalities used a new contract structure for their franchise agreements. And what you described is very much what the option was in that general agreement. So I know a number of municipalities have that option.
So Kevin, if you wanted to say something,
Well, first of all, I want to apologize for being late, but thank you for allowing me to at least listen to the great discussion afterward. And Mark, as always, thank you. Very, very informative. And I like the idea that Councilmember Stone suggested that perhaps there's a group of us who can get together and recruit Mark's talent on crunching some numbers. So that's a great idea.
and I'll just close saying that that's something that the caucus will continue to keep an eye open for. So one thing that we can promise is that we will, of course, post the presentation on the Environment Committee webpage. And then as a worksheet and some models, we'll put the tools up there, and Cheryl will send out a message letting you all know it's there, so that we can commit to. In closing, I'll just offer the next Environment Committee meeting for September. It is the 19th, I think. I have it up in front of me. The third Tuesday, as always, our topic will be environmental justice. So we have particular interest in the municipal perspective on environmental justice. And we've done some work with South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association. So we'll have a kind of a homegrown presentation on environmental justice and all the funding opportunities related.
And Edith, it might be wise, if we haven't done so already, just to let the group here know and everyone else know that you and I are participating in the IML's event in September as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin. I've got to.
No, you do it.
Okay.
I do whatever the hell you tell me to do. So I just show up. So it's like.
Well, this is, I have personally applied to speak at the Illinois Municipal League.
Yes.
This is the fifth submission of
Right.
talking about the Greenest Region Compact, which was kind of a newish thing then. And we're now up to 156 communities. If you hadn't heard, and IML finally said yes. So Kevin and I are presenting,
Yes.
I think it's September 23rd finally.
Correct. Saturday morning. Exactly.
Saturday morning. So that's great opportunity for Kevin to just share Greenest Region Compact and some of our work in
Yeah, really, to boast about all of you. So it's gonna be fun.
with the state. So glad for that. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you to those of you who are at the beneficial electrification
Mhm.
event. Glenn, we're working on the presentations. We don't have that directly, but we're excited. We launched our second EV readiness cohort.
Yes.
First one is still working, so stay tuned on designation and then future funding for more cohorts.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Enjoy the cool temperatures.
Yeah.